In 1930, a 61-year-old man wearing nothing but a loincloth walked 240 miles to a beach. He bent down, picked up a lump of salt, and held it above his head. That single act, picking up salt from the sand, triggered a chain of events that would cost the British Empire roughly $45 billion in today's money. Within 17 years, Britain would be forced to give up India, the jewel in the crown that had funded their global dominance for nearly 200 years. Winston Churchill called this man a half-naked fakir. The British government threw him in jail 9 times. They thought he was just a nuisance. They were wrong. Mahatma Gandhi didn't defeat the British Empire with weapons. He didn't need an army. He did something far more devastating. He made ruling India economically impossible. This is the untold financial story of how one man brought the world's most powerful empire to its knees. And the strategy he used is still changing the world today. To understand how Gandhi bankrupted Britain, you first need to understand what India meant to the British Empire. India wasn't just another colony, it was the economic engine that powered everything. By the early 1900s, India generated roughly 20% of Britain's total imperial revenue. But here's what made India truly special. Britain didn't pay for any of it. Let me explain how this scam worked. The British East India Company first arrived in India in 1600 as traders. By 1757, after the Battle of Plassey, they'd essentially conquered the entire subcontinent. Then in 1858, after the Sepoy Rebellion, the British Crown took direct control. From that point on, Britain set up what historians call the drain of wealth. Here's how it functioned. Britain forced India to export raw materials, cotton, jute, indigo, tea, opium, at artificially low prices to British companies. Then Britain manufactured finished goods and sold them back to India at inflated prices. India had to buy British textiles, British machinery, British everything, by law. But it gets worse. India was forced to pay for its own occupation. The Indian taxpayer funded the British army stationed in India. They paid the salaries of British administrators. They even paid for British military campaigns in other countries. Indian money funded British wars in Afghanistan, China, and Africa. And here's the truly diabolical part. All of this was recorded as debt. Britain claimed India owed them money for the privilege of being ruled. By 1930, India was generating somewhere between $500 million to $1 billion per year for Britain. That's roughly $8 to $16 billion in today's money, every single year. India wasn't just profitable, it was the most profitable enterprise in human history. And Britain would do anything to keep it. But one man was about to figure out how to make it all fall apart. Now, here's what most people don't know about Gandhi. He didn't start as an anti-British revolutionary. He actually supported the British Empire for years. Young Gandhi was a London-educated lawyer. He wore three-piece suits. He tried to be more English than the English. When he first went to South Africa in 1893, he even believed in the superiority of the British Empire. But South Africa changed him. Despite his education and his British suits, Gandhi was thrown off a first-class train because of his skin color. He was beaten. He was humiliated. And slowly, he began to see the empire for what it really was, an economic exploitation system wrapped in the language of civilization. Gandhi returned to India in 1915, and for the next few years, he traveled the country, just watching and listening. He saw the poverty. He saw the famines. He saw how the British economic system was destroying India. And then Gandhi had a revelation that would change everything. Here was his insight. Britain's power in India wasn't military, it was economic. Yes, they had guns and soldiers, but the real control came from the economic system. Britain had made India dependent on British goods, British administration, British everything, which meant the key to freedom wasn't violence. It was economic independence. Gandhi realized something profound. You can't fight an empire with its own weapons. If Indians used violence, Britain would just use more violence. And Britain had bigger guns. The British were experts at crushing armed rebellions. They'd done it for centuries around the world. But what if Indians simply stopped participating in the economic system? What if they stopped buying British goods? stopped working for the British administration, stopped cooperating with British laws? What if they made India ungovernable and unprofitable? This wasn't just protest. This was economic warfare. And Gandhi was about to show the world how it worked. But first, he needed to find the perfect target. Something that would expose the absurdity of British rule and hit them where it hurt most: their profits. In 1930, Gandhi chose his weapon: salt. Now you might be thinking, salt? Really? How is salt supposed to bring down an empire? Stay with me, because this is brilliant. The British had a monopoly on salt production in India. It was illegal for Indians to make or sell salt. They had to buy it from the government at inflated prices, and they had to pay a salt tax on top of that. This salt tax generated about $25 million per year for Britain, roughly $400 million in today's money. It doesn't sound like much compared to India's total economic contribution, but here's why Gandhi chose salt. First, everyone needed salt. Rich, poor, Hindu, Muslim, everyone. It was universal. Second, the salt tax was regressive. It hit the poorest Indians the hardest. A poor family might spend 8 to 10% of their income just on salt. The wealthy barely noticed it. Third, and most importantly, salt was everywhere. India has thousands of miles of coastline. Salt naturally forms on beaches. The idea that Indians couldn't pick up salt from their own beaches, that they had to buy British government salt instead, was absurd. The salt monopoly was the perfect symbol of British exploitation. It was indefensible morally, and it was profitable for Britain, which made it the perfect target. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi began his march from his ashram to the Arabian Sea. He was 61 years old. He walked 240 miles over 24 days. And with every step, more people joined him. By the time he reached the beach at Dandi, there were thousands. On April 6, 1930, Gandhi bent down and picked up a lump of salt. That's it. That was the act. He broke the salt law. The British didn't know what to do. Do you arrest a 61-year-old man for picking up salt? It looks ridiculous. Do you ignore it? Then everyone will do it. They chose to arrest him, and that's when everything exploded. Within weeks, millions of Indians were making salt. They were selling it. They were openly defying the salt laws. The British arrested over 60,000 people. They beat protesters. In one incident at Darasana Salt Works, British soldiers beat 2,500 peaceful protesters with steel-tipped clubs. The brutality was reported around the world. And here's what the British realized too late. Every arrest, every beating, every act of repression was costing them money. Administering arrests cost money. Running courts cost money. Filling jails cost money. Deploying extra police and military cost money. And all of it was being paid for by Indian taxpayers who were now refusing to cooperate. But the Salt March was just the beginning. Gandhi's real economic weapon was something else entirely. While the world focused on the Salt March, Gandhi launched something far more devastating: the Swadeshi movement. Swadeshi means of one's own country. And Gandhi's message was simple: stop buying British goods, make your own, wear your own, be economically self-sufficient. Gandhi made this personal. He took up spinning. Every day he would sit at a spinning wheel and make his own cloth. He urged every Indian to do the same. The spinning wheel became the symbol of the independence movement. And here's where the economic damage really started. Indian textile purchases from Britain dropped by half between 1930 and 1934. Half. That's hundreds of millions in lost revenue. Billions in today's money. British cloth exports to India collapsed. Mills in Manchester and Lancashire started closing. British workers lost jobs. Suddenly, the India problem wasn't just happening in India. It was hurting British workers at home. But Gandhi didn't stop with textiles. The Swadeshi movement expanded. Indians resigned from British civil service positions, creating administrative chaos and forcing Britain to hire more expensive British administrators. Indian lawyers refused to practice in British courts, paralyzing the legal system. Students left British schools and universities, destroying the system that created English-speaking Indian bureaucrats who ran the empire. Indians refused to pay taxes. In some regions, entire villages stopped cooperating with British authority. This wasn't just protest. This was comprehensive economic non-cooperation. And it was working. By the mid-1930s, governing India was becoming prohibitively expensive. Britain was spending more on administration, police, and military than they were extracting in revenue. The math no longer worked, but then something happened that would finish the job. World War II. When World War II began in 1939, Britain desperately needed India. They needed Indian soldiers, Indian resources, Indian money. And Gandhi said no. The British wanted India to support the war effort against Nazi Germany. Gandhi's response: India cannot be asked to fight for democracy abroad when it has no democracy at home. He launched the Quit India movement in 1942. His message: Britain must leave India immediately, or Indians will engage in mass civil disobedience. The British arrested Gandhi and threw him in jail. Again. They arrested the entire Congress Party leadership. They thought this would stop the movement. Instead, it exploded. Strikes, protests, and sabotage erupted across India. The British had to deploy tens of thousands of troops just to maintain order. Troops they needed fighting in Europe and Asia. Here's the financial reality Britain faced by 1945. World War II had devastated British finances. They'd borrowed billions from the United States. Their economy was in ruins. They were essentially bankrupt. Meanwhile, keeping control of India required massive military and administrative expenses. Expenses they couldn't afford. India had stopped being profitable. In fact, India had become a massive financial liability. In 1947, Britain gave up. They granted India independence. After 190 years of rule, the British Empire's most valuable possession was gone. The official reason was granting self-determination. The real reason was simpler. They couldn't afford to stay. Gandhi had made it economically impossible. Here's what makes Gandhi's strategy so revolutionary. He proved that economic power can defeat military power. Gandhi showed that you don't need weapons to fight an empire. You need to make exploitation unprofitable. This strategy didn't die with Gandhi. It's been used over and over. The Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, African Americans in Alabama stopped using segregated buses. The bus companies lost so much money they had to desegregate. Economic pressure, not just moral argument. The anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, international boycotts, and divestment campaigns made apartheid economically unsustainable. Companies pulled out. The government couldn't afford to continue. Today, we see it in consumer boycotts, divestment movements, economic sanctions. The principle is the same: make the unjust system unprofitable. Gandhi understood something that most revolutionaries miss. Empires don't fall because you convince them they're wrong. They fall when you make it too expensive for them to continue. On January 30th, 1948, Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu extremist who thought he was too sympathetic to Muslims. He died at age 78, but his economic strategy had already won. Britain was gone. India was free. The man who picked up a lump of salt had bankrupted an empire. When you hear about Gandhi, most people talk about nonviolence and moral superiority, and yes, those mattered. But what really defeated the British Empire wasn't just righteousness, it was economics. Gandhi made exploitation unprofitable. And that's a lesson that still shapes how people fight for freedom today. If this changed how you think about Gandhi and the economics of empire, hit subscribe. Drop a comment. Did you know about Gandhi's economic strategy? And share this with someone who needs to understand how economic power works. Because the most powerful weapon isn't always the most obvious one. I'll see you in the next one.